It was a sunny afternoon, and the small but bustling eatery in downtown Nairobi hummed with chatter and the clinking of cutlery. Jane sat gracefully, her swollen belly resting against the edge of the table as she carefully picked at her salad. Across from her, Luciana starred, arms crossed, and eyes narrowed like a detective who had just cracked a case. Wait. You mean to tell me Dimitri actually laid hands on you? With this belly? Luciana's finger pointed dramatically at Jane's stomach. Jane shifted uncomfortably. Luciana, it's not like that. Oh really? Luciana snapped, her fork hitting the plate with a sharp clink. You're 8 months pregnant, Jane. What could you have possibly done to deserve that? It's not that simple. Jane fumbled with her napkin, refusing to meet Luciana's fiery gaze. He was just stressed. I left the gas on. The whole kitchen could have exploded. Luciana's eyes bulged. You mean you could have exploded? Jane hissed, glancing nervously at the other diners. I don't care who hears. Luciana shot back, pushing her chair away and grabbing her purse. It's high time you walk away, Jane, before you go missing on the surface of the earth. Jane opened her mouth to protest, but Luciana was already storming toward the exit. Sighing heavily, Jane struggled to her feet and waddled after her. That evening, Jane relayed the entire encounter to Dimitri, her husband, who was sprawled across their living room couch, munching noisily on roasted groundnuts. That Luciana, he said between chews, she's just jealous. Can't keep a man to save her life. Jane burst into laughter, slapping his arm. Stop it. She's my best friend. Well, she better not be your marriage counselor, Dimitri retorted. Next thing you know, she'll be suggesting you marry her dog instead of me. Jane's laughter was cut short as a sharp pain shot through her abdomen. Honey, the baby. Groundnuts flew in every direction as Dimitri scrambled to his feet. The baby's coming. Oh Lord, why now? After a quick trip to the hospital, they finally had their baby boy, Xavier. The doctor helped bring him into the world through a special surgery called a cesarean section. Dimitri was so happy he almost fainted when he saw Xavier wrapped in a soft blue blanket. Luciana came home with them to help out since she was Xavier's godmother. But Jane's happiness didn't last long. Dimitri's mom, Mama Teresa, showed up looking very serious. A cesarean, she said loudly, her face tight with frustration. In my day, we pushed babies out in the middle of yam farms and went back to weeding an hour later. You young women have it too easy these days. She kept quiet, unsure of what to say next. Jane, still sore and barely able to stand, forced a weak smile. Mama, times have changed. Shut up there. Mama Teresa snapped, cutting Luciana off mid-sentence. She leaned over Xavier, inspecting him. And what's this nonsense about nurses changing diapers? She added, her voice rising. Back home, this is the time when mothers bond with their children. You young people have lost all sense of responsibility. Her words hung heavy in the room, making everyone shift uncomfortably as she continued her sharp critique. That night, Mama Teresa made Jane nurse the baby every hour while barking orders like, sit up straight. Don't spoil my grandson with laziness. By the time she left for the village, Jane felt like a soldier recovering from war. Relief came in the form of Jane's mother, Mama Peace, who arrived with suitcases bigger than her body. My daughter, she sang, throwing open the door like a Nollywood actress entering a dramatic scene. You are my only child. Nobody will stress you under my watch. Mama Peace immediately took over the kitchen, the baby, and even laundries. Pepper soup flowed like water, and Jane didn't have to lift a finger. You rest, Mama Peace would say. I'll handle the baby. Xavier and I understand each other. But just when Jane thought life was finally settling into a peaceful routine, the night battles began. Dimitri's temper flared so hot it could have cooked beans to perfection. His sharp words and angry outbursts turned quiet evenings into stormy nights, leaving Jane wondering if their new life would ever truly feel like home. It started with raised voices. Then Dimitri's hand flew before Jane could react. She stumbled backward, hitting her stomach on the edge of the dining table. Mama Peace stormed into the living room like a lioness protecting her cub. What is going on here? Jane clutched her side, but before she could explain, Dmitri retreated to the bedroom. Later at the hospital, as the nurses cleaned and restitched Jane's wound. Back home, Mama Peace evidently worried. "That man is dangerous," she fumed. "You must leave him, Jane. Mama, please." Jane's voice wavered. "Every marriage has ups and downs." Mama Peace's eyes softened, but only slightly. "This is not an up and down, my daughter. This is a down and out." The tension hung like smoke in the house. Dmitri sulked while Mama Peace monitored him like a hawk. One evening, Dmitri cornered Jane in the bedroom. "When is your mother leaving?" "She hasn't even stayed a month," Jane replied cautiously. "If she leaves now, people will start asking questions." "Let them ask." Dmitri snapped. "I can't take care of Xavier alone," Jane pleaded. Dmitri flopped onto the bed, turning his back to her. "Fine." But Jane knew the storm wasn't over. Her mother's protective presence was the only shield keeping her from facing Dmitri's wrath again. And as she lay awake that night, rocking Xavier to sleep, Jane wondered if her excuses were strong enough to hold together the crumbling walls of her marriage, or if it was time to finally let them fall. Jane woke up earlier than usual. Something felt wrong. The house was quiet, too quiet. She walked to her mother's room and peeked inside. Mama Peace was still lying in bed, her face pale and tired. "Mama, are you okay?" Jane asked, gently touching her shoulder. Mama Peace gave a weak smile. "I'm fine, my daughter. Just a little tired." Jane's heart sank. She knew her mother never slept this late. "Don't worry, Mama. I'll boil hot water for your bath," Jane said, trying to sound cheerful. She hurried to the kitchen, lit the stove, and placed a pot of water on the fire. Just as she was about to turn off the gas, Dmitri's voice startled her. "What's all this hot water for again?" he asked, his tone sharp. Jane turned to face him. "It's for Mama to take her bath." Dmitri scoffed. "You're always boiling water in this house. For the baby, for yourself, and now for your mother? What's next? Hot water for the neighbors too." Jane froze, her hands tightening on the pot. "Must you speak like this in front of my mother? You could have told me privately if it was a problem." Dmitri smirked. "So now I can't speak in my own house?" Just then, Mama Peace, who had been standing by the door, asked, "My daughter, is the water ready?" "Yes, Mama," Jane replied quickly. Before anyone could say another word, Dmitri shoved past Jane and pushed Mama Peace out of his way. She stumbled, lost her balance, and fell backward, hitting her head against the hard kitchen tiles. "Mama!" Jane screamed, rushing to her side. Blood was already pooling beneath her head. "Dmitri! Help me! We need to take her to the hospital." But Dmitri didn't turn back. He stormed out of the kitchen, slamming the door behind him. Jane cried and begged, but it was too late. Mama Peace died before help could arrive. When Dmitri's mother, Mama Teresa, heard the news, she came immediately, her face tight and stern. "Jane," she said firmly, "listen to me. You must stand by your husband. Don't tell anyone what happened. If your brothers find out, they will destroy your marriage. We'll just say she fell from the staircase." Jane's heart pounded. "But Mama, this isn't right." Mama Teresa grabbed her hand. "Do you want Xavier to grow up without a father? Think about your son. Sometimes we must bury the truth to protect our family." Torn between guilt and fear, Jane agreed. When her brothers came asking questions, she looked them in the eye and lied. "She fell from the staircase," Jane said softly. Her brothers believed her. The funeral was peaceful, but Jane's heart was heavy. Weeks later, Jane's nightmares began. She dreamed of her mother crying helplessly, reaching out to her but disappearing into the darkness before Jane could save her. Jane tried to push the dreams aside, focusing on Xavier, but then tragedy struck again. Xavier fell sick, very sick. She rushed him to the hospital, but the doctors couldn't save him. Her precious baby boy died in her arms. Jane collapsed in tears. The weight of losing her mother and now her son felt unbearable. Days turned into weeks, and Jane grew quieter. Grief and guilt weighed heavily on her, but Dmitri seemed completely unaffected. He carried on as if nothing had happened, laughing loudly on phone calls and scrolling through his messages with a smirk. Jane's suspicions grew, And one evening, while he was in the shower, curiosity got the better of her. She picked up his phone and scrolled through his messages. Her hands trembled as she read them. "Can't wait to see you again, baby. Yesterday was amazing. Same time next week." Jane's heart sank. The messages weren't just flirty. They were explicit, filled with dirty conversations exchanged with one of his colleagues at the office. Tears streamed down her face as reality hit her. Not only had Dimitri abused her and shattered her family, but now he was cheating too, without a care in the world. Jane put the phone down and stared blankly at the wall. This wasn't the life she had dreamed of. She had sacrificed everything to protect this man. Her mother, her child, her dignity. And for what? For the first time, anger began to replace her fear. Jane knew she couldn't stay silent any longer. And this time, she wouldn't protect him. One evening, Jane sat alone, staring at the family photo hanging on the wall. Her mother's warm smile seemed to speak to her. Suddenly, the guilt overwhelmed her. She couldn't pretend anymore. Jane called her brothers and told them the truth, everything. From Dimitri's abuse to how their mother had died. Her brothers were silent at first. Then anger exploded like a firecracker. "You let him get away with it," one of them shouted. "We trusted you, Jane," the other added. "And you lied to us? You protected him instead of Mama?" Jane broke down, begging for forgiveness. But her brothers shook their heads. "You're no longer our sister," they said coldly. "We will never forgive you for this." Jane's world shattered. She had lost her mother, her son, and now her brothers. Just when Jane thought it couldn't get any worse, police officers knocked on her door the next day. "We need to speak with Dimitri," one of them said. Jane's heart raced. "Why?" "He's under investigation for fraud and theft at his workplace. We have evidence, and we need to take him in." Jane watched in disbelief as Dimitri was handcuffed and led out of the house. For the first time, she saw fear in his eyes. In the weeks that followed, Jane began rebuilding her life. She reported Dimitri's abuse and testified against him in court. He was sentenced to prison, not just for his crimes at work, but for the abuse and neglect that led to her mother's death. But despite the small victory, Jane's heart remained broken. Her brothers refused to speak to her, and the guilt of her choices haunted her. As she stood by her mother's grave one day, Jane whispered, "I'm sorry, Mama. I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make it right." And from that moment, Jane vowed to fight for other women trapped in abusive marriages, hoping to save them from making the same mistakes she did.